Shalom. We are continuing our journey through Psalms today with Psalm 16, which begins with the phrase, a michtam of David. I cannot translate that word michtam because the meaning of that Hebrew word is not clear. Protect me, O God, for I seek refuge in you. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord, my benefactor, there is none above you. As to the holy and mighty ones that are in the land, my whole desire concerning them is that those who espouse another God may have many sorrows. I will have no part of their bloody libations. Their names will not pass my lips. The Lord is my allotted share and portion. You control my fate. Delightful country has fallen to my lot. Lovely indeed is my estate. I bless the Lord who has guided me. My conscience admonishes me at night. I am ever mindful of the Lord's presence. He is at my right hand. I shall never be shaken. So my heart rejoices, my whole being exults, and my body rests secure. For you will not abandon me to Sheol, or let your faithful one see the pit. You will teach me the path of life. In your presence is perfect joy. Delights are ever in your right hand. One of the things I wonder about in this psalm is the idea that while the psalmist claims that he is ever mindful of the Lord's presence, that God is always at his right hand, at the same time, when he goes to bed at night, his conscience admonishes him and chastises him. Meaning that even with the awareness of God's presence in his life or in our lives, we still have the capacity to transgress, to go off track. And that is because we are only human, we are imperfect beings, and it is our nature to often be attracted by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. That doesn't mean that God isn't showing up. It means that we are not showing up. God is here, but we are actually absent from fulfilling our spiritual potential, absent from living the most righteous life that we can aspire to. And so we would like to be aware of God's presence in our lives every day, but sometimes we lose that capacity for awareness. Still, that doesn't mean that God isn't here for us. What happens, though, to those who are abandoned to Sheol, who are left to suffer in the pit? Today, as I record this, on April 20th, 2020, tonight and tomorrow we observe Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And on this day we will remember and memorialize the 6 million Jews who died, the approximately 5 million non-Jews who perished, and we also remember the acts of Gevurah, of heroism and martyrdom, taken not only by those who perished, but also by the righteous Gentiles, many of whom lost their own lives, but all of whom risked their lives in order to save Jews during the years of the Shoah. Many of them, I am sure, felt that God had abandoned them to the pit, to Sheol, to the netherworld. Others felt the opposite. There were also many who felt the power of God's presence throughout their sufferings. There were many who were able to preserve or even find a sense of faith through the darkness. There were others who lost their faith or who never had it, perhaps. Where does the truth lie? It is not up to any of us. None of us has the right to argue that for those who felt abandoned by God, that God indeed had been with them, even though they felt abandoned. And on the other hand, how can we argue with those who preserved their sense of faith, who felt that God was with them throughout their suffering? And who among us can turn that reasoning on its head and claim that God actually had hidden God's face and was absent, was hiding throughout the Holocaust? The reality is actually very subjective. Those who felt one way were right. Those who felt another way were right. It's all according to their own subjective experience. Either way, the fact is that so many millions suffered, lost their lives. So many felt cut off by God. Others felt that God was with them. Either way, we mourn and we grieve their loss. Our hearts share in their suffering, pain, and the suffering of those who survived their losses. It is our role to always remember their sacrifice and to always be mindful of the idea that suffering and pain are real in this life, cannot be ignored, cannot be denied, and yet at the same time, there is always the possibility that through all these sufferings, one can, if they choose, preserve or develop or build a sense of God's presence, of God's power, of God's love in their lives, in spite of the suffering they endure. The psalmist concludes with, "You will teach me the path of life. In your presence is perfect joy. Delights are ever in your right hand." In spite of suffering and pain, in spite of tragedy and catastrophe and loss, it is within our capacity as spiritual human beings to seek God's presence, to find or try to find joy, simcha, in our lives, to try to live a life of goodness and righteousness and meaning, and to try to live a life in which we are ever aware, or at least try to be ever aware, of the presence of God in our existence. It's a good goal to work towards. None of us can do it every day, successfully, every day or all day, but it is a worthwhile goal to try to live a life that is godly, that is somehow inspired by this feeling of God's presence in our lives. We can't give up no matter what happens. We need to try to hold on to these worthwhile aspirations. Thank you.